Welcome again after that little break. The next panel brings together some really interesting people. We have a topic that is mainly concerning tokenization and the democratization of it, and it will also touch a bit on greenwashing. We have a Copenhagen Fintech resident in the CEO of Hive Online here with me in the studio. We have Maker Foundation and co-founder of MakerDAO, the co-founder of Bakari, the leads of business of Binance, and it's all moderated by the head of PR in Binance Africa. I think it sounds super interesting, so please take it away, Damilola.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course.
Can everyone see my video? It seems there's a bit of a... Perfect.
We see you now.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Tokenization and Democratization panel. I'm just going to quickly introduce some of the speakers. We've got Kieran McDevitt, who is the co-founder of Bakari. Hi.
Hi, Debbie. Nice to be here.
Hi. Hi. We've also got Rune Christensen, who is the CEO of MakerDAO. MakerDAO issues the DAI stablecoin. Hi, Rune.
Hey, glad to be here.
And we've also got Emmanuel Babalola, my colleague at Binance, who leads business and operations at Binance Nigeria.
Yeah, hi, Dami. Good to be here.
Great to have you all here. So let's get straight into it. Emmanuel, I'm actually going to start off with you for this panel, as we've already been introduced on tokenization and democratization. So could you please explain tokenization in simple terms for our audience and how it works with blockchain technology?
Yeah, okay, awesome. So first of all, to understand the concept of tokenization, we pretty much have to talk about blockchain technology. You know, the word blockchain has become kind of like a buzzword in today's world, and the potential in the entire internet is massive. Today, it powers kind of like the economy on the internet. And the reason why it does that is because it actually allows us to transfer value over the internet. Take, for instance, file transfer. If I took a picture of you today, the only way to transfer that data to you is maybe through Bluetooth or whatever media. But what ends up happening is that I still have kind of like a copy of that data. So it wasn't possible to transfer actual value over the internet, except through the blockchain. Today, with the help of the blockchain, I can actually transfer that file to you, and I don't retain a copy of that file. And that's why it powers cryptocurrencies today, where people can actually spend $100, and it actually works in that way without any intermediary. Now, the blockchain now powers the tokenization. Why? Because today it allows anything to be tokenized, from real estate to certificates to contracts, you know. And one of the things about tokenization is it's like the next step of digitization. Before now, we had papers and like books, hard copies. And, you know, in Africa, we could just convert that to, let's say, a digital format of an ebook. But the tokenization step is moving it forward a bit to just actually transforming it into an actual valuable data that represents the actual value. So with that, you can have a use case where tokenization can actually allow people participate in a particular ecosystem. So that's why democratization comes in, where people can actually have what we call decentralized autonomous communities, and a company can actually literally convert its shares into tokens and allow people participate directly in that way. So there are a bunch of features that allow cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology affect, you know, democratization in a lot of ways.
I actually realized I forgot to introduce Sophie. Hi, Sophie. Sorry.
Hi, that's all right, Sammy.
Hi, Sophie is the CEO of Hive Online, and she works to help communities that are typically financially excluded to gain access to credits and markets. So this leads me to my second question, Sophie, which I would love it if you could answer. How do you think tokenization will contribute to financial inclusion?
Well, I think it has enormous potential through the model we've built. For example, we have a 3-token model which enables savings groups and cooperatives and other types of informal communities to build wealth without needing a bank account, which in Africa, whereas, I mean, it's been said before many times that 66% of people are unbanked, is hugely transformational. It also means that people can accumulate wealth and transact without the need for any kind of formal account, which I think, I come from a banking background. I spent nearly 30 years building banks, and when I worked in Africa with Citigroup, banking services just don't work for rural populations in particular. So I think for rural populations in Africa and in other developing economies, I think it's hugely, the opportunity is huge and it's hugely transformational. I also think that using tokenization to track goods and assets and natural capital could and should be the way that continents like Africa can start to realize their natural wealth. I'm also a great believer in tokenizing social capital so that communities can actually build on the strong social bonds that they have and use those as real assets in the real economy. And that's something we would love to do eventually at Hive Online.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So as we were introduced, we said that this panel is going to touch on greenwashing. And one of the big issues of greenwashing is that it leads to a lot of mistrust in brands and products. And specifically, consumers feel like they're losing power due to a lack of transparency. And I was reading that a lot of research shows that the main reason for people continuing to buy products from companies that engage in greenwashing is because it's really hard to investigate how green a company actually is. So Kieran, I would love your thoughts on this. What practical ways can blockchain technology combat the negative effects of greenwashing, both for consumers and companies?
Sure. So to start off focusing on consumers, and Sophie touched on it briefly, I would highlight blockchain provenance solutions. And by way of example, on the African continent, so the provenance of diamonds is something that has been, bless you, something that there have been applications developed for some time now, the tracking the provenance of diamonds on a blockchain. So, for example, now we might have Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa as participants of the Kimberley process to try and stem the flow of conflict diamonds. That process is still relatively traditional and analog, but, if we can move over to a new paradigm where we're implementing a sort of a technological process with much more rigor, I think we can all be confident that it's a step in the right direction. And that applies to supply chains and across various businesses. So it's all about traceability and verifiable traceability. And so I think that's probably going to be one of the first use cases that we see really coming into its own.
Okay, awesome. And Rune, what other practical steps do you think companies can take to utilize blockchain technology and in fact prove that they are green?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to using blockchain technology today, I think actually the first and most important thing is to make sure that companies don't just engage in it kind of, without actually realizing the real practical benefit, but rather just doing it in order to tell their shareholders, for instance, that they're doing it. And in a way, you could actually see it kind of like blockchain washing happening almost, where companies will do it just to say they're doing it without realizing what's the real low-hanging fruit that can be used right now. And I think when it comes to practical examples, there's examples like energy markets, right, where you can do things like tokenize units of electricity, units of energy. There are multiple networks around the world already that are delivering this, both in the US and Europe, that I'm aware of. And I think finding solutions like that out there that are already live and that actually work and that have some sort of tangible benefit that makes sense today is actually what I think is the most important thing. Typically, when companies try to do some new blockchain experiment from scratch, it does fall into this category of never really, not, of course, there are exceptions, but very often it won't actually take off. And I think that's also because, and this is something that's very important to understand in order to figure, to really understand what is the value, the real sort of powerful value proposition of blockchain. And that is, it's all about composability and interoperability between multiple agents and multiple systems in a network or in an economy. So basically building a standalone system, kind of like, let's say a company decides we're going to do our own, whatever supply chain tracking on the blockchain from scratch. That's typically not going to be very useful because you might as well just do it do it with a database, right? That's kind of a very common comment that people say about a lot of the blockchain experiments that companies do. So I think really it's about finding already running networks or examples or some sort of use case that exists today, and try to tap into that. So the energy grids that exist in the US and Europe, that's just like one interesting example. When it comes to use cases that are very specific to Africa and the developing world, for instance, my favorite project, my favorite projects that I like to really bring up is what's called the Althea network. So this is actually a startup, incredibly cool startup, that what they're doing is they're using the blockchain in order to, kind of in the same way as other companies are tokenizing energy, for instance. What they're tokenizing is actually access to the internet. And that enables people to actually create these wireless stations, essentially, that they can then actually sell out their bandwidth using blockchain transfers and essentially tokenize internet access. So people can very easily buy it. And ultimately that allows, first of all, a lot of different individuals or businesses to access the internet more cheaply or more easily, or maybe they'll be able to access it in places where there typically isn't coverage, and it actually also enables completely new business models and business opportunities, even for individuals who might want to run these kind of internet relays that tap into this Althea network. So I think finding projects like that and building on top of them is really the way that a company today can take tangible steps to harness the power of blockchain. Again, I actually think it's more important to be careful and not just jump into something, because then you might get turned off by sort of the initial experience. And generally, blockchain is still quite early, so it's also in many cases the best option might be to simply wait and see when there's something mature that's ready for you to utilize for actual real impact on your business.
Right. Thank you, Rune. I love that you use the term blockchain washing. Sophie, I actually would love your thoughts on that. What are your thoughts on the idea of blockchain washing and companies?
Oh my goodness! So we've just finalising a report for the Danish Red Cross and Mercy Corps about what would the ideal blockchain for the humanitarian sector look like, which will be published next week. And the number of projects that we have seen in the humanitarian sector which could have been done on a standard database is huge. And we appreciate that they're experimenting with the technology. There are lots of potential benefits. They've realised a lot of benefits. But what we see again and again is exactly what Rune said. I think what's really exciting in the sort of greenwashing space, though, is also what we can do with traceability and all the things that Rune talked about with diamonds and things, because you could do that with any asset. But yeah, I totally agree that I think a lot of blockchain projects are done because somebody's very enthusiastic about blockchain, realizes it has a lot of potential, and then isn't allowed to use it to its full potential because of the risks, because of the perception that it's Bitcoin, because of the perception that it's volatile and burning the planet and all that sort of thing. So yeah.
Right. And going back a bit to greenwashing, but more into green bonds and green financing, I think I mentioned earlier that I read an article around the worst examples of greenwashing being in green bonds. What are your thoughts on this? How can blockchain technology help reduce greenwashing with green bonds?
So again, we did a report on this last year, and the opportunities are significant. First of all, many companies who issue a green bond will put the money initially into a green something, and then eventually it becomes a brown something. So money is earned and then replaced as more brown stuff. So that's a big issue that can be addressed by having fully traceable value chains, which you can do on blockchain. The other thing that I think is really exciting is the ability to do real-time tracking of impact using blockchain technology, because a lot of the issue with green bonds is the fact that there is very little investment in the African continent and in developing economies because of a lack of trust, and blockchain is the trust machine. The other thing that's really exciting, and again Kieran touched on this, is the fractionalization of assets, so that you could issue a bond with $1 million $1 tokens rather than having to issue a $10,000 or $100,000. So at every stage of the bond issuance process that there is opportunity for green bonds, and I think that's really exciting.
Right. Thank you. And Emmanuel, I'd like to come back to you and Rune as well. So, there's an argument that not all blockchain applications are actually environmentally sustainable. Some of the critique is that, some blockchain applications can be harmful to the environment. So I'd love your thoughts on this, and how do you think this has been addressed by the industry today? And before you begin, I have an example. So a lot of people argue that cryptocurrencies significantly use a large amount of energy as a criticism for it, and obviously that uses blockchain technology. So yeah, what do you think about this, and how do you think the industry is and can address this criticism? Emmanuel, you go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So basically, sustainability, maybe any process or output that is economically viable. So if you look at the entire cryptocurrency industry, you see that there's a tilt towards more sustainable ways of producing blocks and achieving consensus. And one of that is delegated proof of stake and proof of stake. So I know most of the critics would reference Bitcoin mining as one of the biggest causes of pollution. But if you look at the most used and most active blockchains right now, you would see that many of them are moving towards the more sustainable and socially inclusive and also environmentally friendly approaches. So yeah, there's progress on that actually.
Great. And Rune, what is your take on this?
I mean, just to expand on what Emma is saying, right, is that the classic model for protecting a blockchain security is, right, which means essentially, you could almost call it wasting electricity as a means of proving that you have basically put an amount of economic, you could say, economic value into the system, and as a result, you're sort of invested in the system's success, and that's why you can be trusted. That sounds a little bit complicated, but that's basically the game theory around it, right? That the different actors in a blockchain, they don't necessarily trust each other, directly through their relationships. In fact, they probably don't even know who they are, each other, right? They could be anonymous participants. But they use these economic signals, such as essentially proving that they've wasted a lot of electricity, to then create this game theoretic, you would call it a Schelling point in a sense, right? That there's a lot of value in this system, and that's why when we are contributing to the system, you can trust that the data that we're basically adding to it. And the problem is that it just doesn't sound so great that people are purposefully wasting electricity as a way to sort of send a message, essentially, right? There should be a better way to do this, and there are, again, as Emma said, right, that there is this new generation of technologies, and basically what they essentially rely on is replacing burning and wasting electricity with another kind of signal. Typically what it is specifically locking up blockchain tokens. So basically units of account that exist in a blockchain. Actually, Bitcoin would be an example. Although the Bitcoin blockchain is not doing this because it's not really going to change. So Bitcoin's always going to be burning electricity, unfortunately. Okay. But some of the others, more advanced blockchains, such as Ethereum, which is the blockchain that the Maker project and the DAI stablecoin runs on, for instance. Ethereum is right now using proof of work, meaning it's right now secured through people wasting electricity eventually. But it's moving towards what's called proof of stake, which means instead of people wasting electricity in order to prove the security of the network, what they'll be doing is they will be locking in their tokens into the network and essentially showing this is how much money I have at stake, and that's why you can trust me. And it's hugely more efficient, right? There's actually no waste any longer, and all of the power and sort of all of the energy needs of the network is entirely used to just drive the actual processing power and storage cost of the network itself. So I think that's obviously very exciting because it shows that the industry can become very sustainable and probably really surpass things like big banks and big data centers with offices and concrete and So like there's a lot of things that exist in traditional systems that blockchains can replace, that all actually have a big environmental footprint that already can be replaced even with something like Bitcoin today, or just like even the proof of work type of blockchains. And then as we move into proof of stake, it'll be another leapfrogging event where we can really create a financial layer for the world that just has a very clean footprint.
Right. Great. Thank you, Rowan. Kieran and Sophie, so beyond what we've talked about with blockchain technology mainly being transparent and some of the examples that Rune gave, what are the other benefits that you feel are largely ignored or not yet widely used, particularly around environmental sustainability challenges? Sophie, if you can go first.
Yeah, sure. And I'll build on what Rune was saying, because there's also some emerging protocols like federated Byzantine fault tolerance and asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance that are used by the Stellar Network and by Hedera Hashgraph, which is actually not a blockchain, it's a DAG, but that's I'm not going into that, which don't have the downsides of proof of stake or proof of authority. So I think that there's still emerging technologies which are going to be even better. I think something that is not widely exploited, which should be, and is beginning to be in the private sector at least, is using blockchain for certification and identity. So, for example, if you're a refugee, if your yellow fever certification was on the blockchain, you could take that anywhere. You wouldn't have to get local validation, even if you've lost all your documents. It's already being used in some countries for registering property rights. So those kind of certifications and registrations, which are very closely linked to identity and support self-sovereign identity, which again, we don't really have time to go into, but the concept of self-sovereign identity is that you own all your data and you only expose the bits that people need to see. So instead of giving your driver's license to a bartender where he can see where you live, you just show that you are over 18. Those kind of certifications on the blockchain, I think, are going to be a huge part of future use cases, and very useful for obviously tagging environmental assets. We've mentioned diamonds, we've mentioned carbon, we've mentioned various other things, but actually certifying that things are green and clean and fair trade and all of those things, I think that's going to be huge.
Great. And Karen, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of underutilization of blockchain technology, which ones are underutilized, I would say everything, all of them at the moment. It's still early. There's still a long way to go in terms of maturity of a lot of these applications, but maybe specifically with respect to environmental sustainability, one developing and very interesting one I think that is worth mentioning is DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. For the moment, I mean, a lot of challenges in environmental sustainability are attacked by, governments or large businesses, those with weight and with capital to attack those sorts of serious, large global problems. But I think, with DAOs, we have the ability maybe for people to organize themselves, to fund a vision and to execute that vision in an efficient way. That can be done now, but it's costly, it's perhaps not practicable. But I think DAOs will go a long way to making that practical and allowing people to get together to solve, I guess, their own issues and their own causes.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you all for joining me today. I feel like you've all shared some really great insights. Is there anything else you want to add before we have to go? We have a few more minutes left and I haven't seen any questions. So if there's anything you want to add on tokenization, democratization, I'd love to hear from you. And
I would...
Yes,
I would maybe just add one thing from the beginning that popped into my mind now. To maybe just elaborate on what Emmanuel said. I mean, so, tokenization is the representation of assets on a blockchain. It's different to a cryptocurrency in that these tokens involved in tokenization derive their value from the assets that are being tokenized. And something that's maybe not spoken about enough in technological circles is the legal and regulatory underpinnings of that tokenization. So by way of example, if somebody tokenizes gold, for example, they may have a company to do so. They may buy the gold and store it in the vault under their building. But what actually is the link that the token holder has to that gold? In the event of bankruptcy or liquidation, are they first in line to receive the proceeds of that gold? Probably not. So I think the conversation in regulatory circles is moving at a pace, and a lot of progress is being made. There are jurisdictions right now where you can have things like securities registries directly on the blockchain. But I think that is a key point to bear in mind when we're talking about tokenization, is what really is that token affording you legally and in a regulatory respect.
Yes, perfect. Well, thank you all for joining today. Thanks everyone for listening. This has been the Tokenization and Democratization panel at Copenhagen Fintech Week. Have a great afternoon or evening, depending where you are.
Thank you so much. This was super, super interesting. So I'll be sure to watch this space much more in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.